trainings, and services. We do have someone monitoring the chat room tonight, as you've probably already heard. The presenter or panelists may answer many of your questions, or a response may come back to you in the chat room, but please feel free to let us know if there's specific additional supports that you need for our county. And once again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend our event tonight. Thank you.
So I guess that means it's up to me. And I want to add to that welcome that Marianne gave. And I want to really acknowledge the many, many people that worked on this. And I'll show you a list of our co-sponsors, and hopefully I haven't missed any. I want to give you a couple of pieces. For those of you who are relatively new to Zoom, I think all of us were new to Zoom 10 months ago. I want to acknowledge that you can use the chat to put in questions, to put in comments. A number of people have already posted resources there, and I invite you to post any resources that you're aware of, either that are available across Washington County or statewide virtually. And please put your questions in there. We will have a question and answer at the end where people will be able to raise their hand. And if you go to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions, you can have a little hand raise. You can see my hand just rose to do that. So please feel free to use that, because we would like to kind of know who's here and what your concerns are. Because if this is a community forum, it needs input from as many people as are willing to give that. And even before I start sharing my screen, I want to make this very clear. Tonight we're talking about suicide. And I never enter a room with more than about 3 people without assuming that people's lives, other than my own, have been touched by suicide. And perhaps that is doubly true right now in your part of Washington County, with the losses that have already been acknowledged. And I'm going to talk about the stigma of suicide later, but I want to say that don't assume that the person in the Zoom box next to you has not been touched by suicide, because it's something that we often don't easily or comfortably talk about. So I just want to put that on the table. I'm going to share my screen and share some slides, and fairly quickly, I'm going to share a slide that is, I'm going to share a poll to kind of ask some questions of you. So I want to acknowledge that much of the work that I do across the state, I do with the support of the Maine Suicide Prevention Program. And I work for NAMI Maine. And we have several people here from NAMI, some of them we're going to talk about. But the Suicide Prevention Program pays much of my salary, and I do trainings all over the state under that. The Suicide Prevention Program is part of the state of Maine Center for Disease Control. And we really track data and trends around the state and around the nation. And we provide a range of trainings to all kinds of partners: schools, healthcare, veteran serving groups, law enforcement, elder programs, you name it. And we do a great deal of technical assistance, supporting people to develop protocols and strategies for addressing suicide prevention, and also a lot of post-vention support and guidance after a loss or where someone's concerned about risk. And if you have more questions, you can certainly ask at the end about what we do and how it might be able to support the work you're doing up in Washington County. I also want to be very open. We are recording this event. We're recording it so that other people who are not able to be here tonight can have access to this information and resources. But I ask you to pay attention to what you choose to share. The chat will not be recorded, but the video part of it will. But I just want to make sure people are aware of that. So this is the list of organizations that contributed time and energy to tonight's session. Certainly NAMI and the Maine Suicide Prevention Program, but also the Togus VA, Veterans Administration System, Suicide Prevention System, the Aroostook Mental Health Center, Calais School Department, and Calais City Council, as well as the school board and the Calais Police Department. Dunkin' Donuts in Calais here, and the wonderful work that John does connecting this community together. He's the one that first alerted me. The Baileyville Town Council and Baileyville Police Department, as well as the school board there. The St. Croix Regional Family Health Center, Woodland Elementary, Junior, Senior High, I guess that's Baileyville, and the Indian Township School and Community, as well as WQDY for spreading the word. And I would not be surprised if I have left somebody out. And I hope that's not true, but it's possible. This was a wonderful group. And as Marianne said, it came together really, really quickly, which tells me so much. This is what we're going to cover pretty quickly. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about grief and how to support each other in grief after a suicide. We're going to spend some time in the center with a lot of people talking about resources available here in the county, as well as statewide. And then I'm going to do a little bit on suicide prevention. And how much I go into that a little bit is going to depend on how long this takes before we get there. I want to launch a poll, and I want you to be able to answer this. And this is totally anonymous. I want, for our information, I want to know who's here. And so for you, you're attending tonight primarily as, and I know there's going to be some overlap, and so you might be able to mark two. Are you a parent of a student, a parent of an adult, another concerned community member, a concerned community professional, a student, or part of the school community, school staff? And I know we have a pretty range, and that may be a limited selection. But I'm going to leave you a couple minutes to finish that, and then I'm going to immediately share the results to show you who's here. It's a wonderful thing about the Zoom polls. It's immediate feedback. And while we do that, I'm going to move ahead because I want to make sure that we acknowledge the losses here. So I'm going to stop the poll and share the results. And I hope everybody had a chance. So we have almost half the people here are school staff. A third are concerned members of the community, concerned professionals. We have a handful of students, 12%. We have parents of students, about a third of us, and parents of an adult, about 7%. So a good mix of people across the community. I am so pleased with that. So I'm going to stop that, and I want to start right here. And that is to acknowledge the losses you've had and experienced. And I know of some. And I've got a quote from Maya Angelou here, which I think is really powerful. He says, "When great souls die, after a period, peace blooms. Slowly and always irregularly." And to me, that speaks so much of grief, the time that it takes, and that we all do it at our own pace that's often different from each other. So when a death happens, particularly if it's traumatic, particularly if it's suicide, we have a divide in our life. And this quote from Lexi Bernhardt is great. It says, "And me, I'm the lucky one who knew you, who carried you, whose life will ever be divided into a before and an after because of you." And in my work, in my life, I hear that so much. People will ask me, "So what do you do?" And I talk about my work in suicide prevention. And so often it will trigger a story that might be 30 years ago or 40 years ago or 50 years ago, to a time in their life when they lost someone to suicide. Whether they were in high school, college, in their adult life, as a child, it comes up. And they remember that, and they go right back there forever into a before and after. And that's the way a traumatic death, it stays in us. And this is a community where you've had multiple losses. The ones that I've been aware of are 4 members to suicide over the past 2 months. Several adults, a teenager. And anytime we have a suicide or multiple suicides, people are struggling. They're trying to understand. We are all seeking to answer that question, why? Why? Why now? Why this person? And it always brings up our fear and our concern about the safety of others. And in particularly in my work around youth, with youth and with youth suicide prevention, that worry about contagion happens. So someone asked me this week, so is there a cluster of suicides happening up in Washington County, in this region of Washington County? A cluster means that they're more connected with each other. These are connected in the geography. I don't know if they're connected more than that. So you'll have to share with me whether you believe it's a cluster. But certainly there's concern of that. And this is happening. This is happening during the pandemic year. The pandemic, while we are often more isolated than we want to be, we struggle with making connections. Our young people are feeling isolated, and that uncertainty that goes along with it makes this a very hard time. It's a harder time to grieve. And I learned this early on, that there are so many different forms of loss, so many different forms of death. And I'm going to bring up 3 examples that really underscore how different a suicide loss is. We have the completion, like my friend Sam Ristich. And Sam died at age 93. His death was timely. It was pretty expected. It was smooth. He went to sleep after having lunch with his wife and his daughter, and he never woke up. And we celebrated his life, and we felt some grief over the richness that would no longer be shared with us. And most of us could let him go pretty easily. And that's very different than a life that's interrupted. A death that's untimely, it's
I
unexpected.
think I got it.
It's unexpected, and it happens without our knowledge, often. And when we have an interrupted death, there's the shock of it, the anger, the questions, and the torment that goes along with that shocking death. And then more than that is the self-interrupted death, the suicide, which is untimely, unexpected, and it's self-inflicted. And all that goes added to that, the other ones, to the question and the torments, are often guilt and regret. And we can ask, where in this would an accidental overdose fit? And I think it's very much, in terms of the complicated grief that gets triggered, it's very much like a suicide. And also, like a suicide, it has stigma associated with it. It's harder to talk about, it's harder to acknowledge. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So when a suicide happens, almost all the time, it's sudden. It's sudden, it's unexpected. Even if that person has been struggling, we don't expect that death. It's self-inflicted, it's a premature self-inflicted death, and often it's violently. So it's a scene that is not at all happy to see. And in some cases, the cause of death is not determined right away, and it may be time to do that, or it may not be open to the public and acknowledged to the public. And that's also, it happens around a suicide. And so when it happens, a suicide, it's like that boulder dropped in a still pond, and those closest to where it impacts get overwhelmed. And the ones further out feel it and feel that shock, but not quite so strongly. And so the reactions are wide, but it depends on how close you are emotionally to that center. So initially, shock, disbelief, uncertainty. I can't believe it's true. And underneath that is the hurt. And often often I find anger. And in that first day or days, it's anger that's looking for a place to point. Someone I know in my family was pointed at the police and said they messed up the investigation. And she totally believes that her son's suicide was a homicide. And that's where she got stuck. Underneath that anger are the questions, the seeking to answer the reason why, seeking to understand the torment of that, and often the confusion, the despair, the real loneliness of grief. And I rarely learn of a suicide where there's not also a lot of guilt. Guilt that kind of tries to answer the question, is there something I could have done? Is there something I should have done? I might have done to make this not happen. So after suicide, everyone who knows about it, everybody who's touched by this person's life and their death is affected. And, in a community, a small community, or where there's multiple suicides, everyone feels exposed and a little less safe. And some people, the people that knew someone personally, coworker, neighbor, they're affected. That grief they have, it rocks them for a while. And then closer in are the friends, the close coworkers, the teammates, and their grief and their reaction and feeling of that loss is longer and more intense. It takes them a long time to get through it. And in the very heart of this, there's the family members, the loved ones, the best friends, and their bereavement can last for years. And if their parents regularly tell me, we don't heal from this. We don't get through it. We might get on with our life at some point, but it's always walks right beside me. And the closer one is emotionally, the stronger the impact. So, how are these losses affecting you and those people in your life, your children, your community members? Are you someone who's the family of someone who died by suicide? Did you know them? Did you know them? Did you know their family? And, is there a way that you can relate to their lives or their situation driving their death? I know my understanding is two of the people who died were veterans of military service. And so veterans are going to feel that. My understanding is one person had been involved in substance use recovery. So people in recovery and family members are going to feel that closely. Teenagers absolutely feel that deeply. Are you someone who has suffered other losses that this brings up? And I regularly see that. A loss that people thought were pretty well healed suddenly comes back, reminded by this. And for parents, particularly around this teenager's death, you're worried about the safety of your children. You may already be worried about how they're doing in this pandemic. And feel free to share some of this in chat if you want to. Any things that I'm asking about. So how is this loss or these losses affecting students and our children and adolescents and young adults? And for the boy who died, those closest to him, those closest to his family, those who interacted with him in the days leading up to his death, those who knew him well through school, those friends, those who knew him in the community, or the students who knew one of the adults who died. And I always worry about those youth and adults who have a history of trauma or losses and where they easily get triggered back into crisis. And this is a time that's harder for them. So for all of us, who we lose matters. 12 years ago, I lost my best friend to suicide. And that hurt. That was deep. But it's different. A friend is there. And if it's a distant acquaintance, it's one thing. A close friend, a best friend is closer. How about if it's a teammate, a clubmate, part of somebody in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community, a fellow veteran of military service? If it's a sibling, it's even closer. If I lost my sibling while I was young, it affects me one way. As an adult, it may be affecting me a little differently. If I lose my spouse, if it's a lifelong tight spouse, if it's a spouse where we were estranged and breaking up, or a former spouse, a little different. If I lose a parent, did I lose that parent as a child, as an adolescent, as adult? That affects my growth differently. A grandparent, an uncle, an aunt, a cousin, and always if there's multiples there. Or did you lose a child? Child lost while they're a child, and as an adolescent, as an adult. I'm not suggesting in any way there's a hierarchy of loss, but there are definitely distinct differences. Though I might suggest that a parent losing a child, no matter what age that child, is perhaps the most challenging. So we all deal with loss. Losses happen. They're inescapable. And from any loss, grief follows. Grief is natural. It happens. It's a part of growing up and change. And in this year of a pandemic, we are already having lots of losses, even before any traumatic deaths happen. So for young people, a suicide or a traumatic death, it may be the first significant death of someone close to them, someone that they knew well. And if it was a suicide, it starts to shake their own sense of safety and maybe mortality. And I've had many conversations with parents about, do I tell my child what the nature of this death was? And how do I tell them? And at what age is it appropriate to tell them? Boy, that's a whole nother ballgame. And for all of us, we each grieve in our own unique way. And for adolescents especially, I hear sometimes they say, well, she or he hardly reacted at all. It seemed like they were numb, they were unresponsive. And other people will be hysterical. And I invite you to consider the person that's non-responsive or numb. It may be because they're not comfortable with what they're feeling and are kind of holding it in. Think about that. That was my son after Paul's death. He was really angry at this man who took his own life. And he was uncomfortable with that anger, and so he got quiet. And for many people, particularly young people, and often for men, the strong emotions they fear that if they let them out, it'll get out of control. And we'll talk more, guys and girls often grieve differently. And we'll talk a bit more about that. And teens may mask their feelings, particularly from parents or from each other, because they're so painfully conscious of everything. And the reactions can be across the board: hurt, anger, denial, fear, that torment of questions, trying to understand it. And underneath that is the loss, the loneliness, the sadness. And I'm going to go through this. There's a wonderful researcher and clinician 52 years ago, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, came up with her stages of grief. And they don't always go one way. They don't, we don't go through all of them, but it's some stages that are often true. That initial shock can be often accompanied by denial. It's not true. It couldn't be a suicide. And then the anger, the projection, and that anger that gets projected out onto somebody else or something else. For kids, I worry about peers that might have been accused of bullying, a girlfriend or boyfriend that had broken up, those kinds of things. And underneath that is the guilt. And the guilt can also turn to blame to somebody else. And particularly for young people, be aware of how much they can take responsibility for something outside their control. And almost inevitably, at some point, anger will come up at the person who died. How could they do that? How they could do that to us? Anxiety is a part of it, uncertainty, the fear-driven stuff, and then underneath that, the loneliness, the real work of making sense of the story over time. And at some point in this pathway, people reconnect to life. And you might ask me, at what point? How long? And I'm going to say something vague like, how long is a string? Because it's going to really differ for each individual. We know that grief after a suicide takes maybe 3 to 5 times longer than at that end of life natural death. And it's really different. There's no right timeline. Just like there's no right or wrong way to grieve. But there are behaviors, there are things you should be aware of that are kind of red flags. You know, that people stuck in rumination over the death that can't let it go, particularly if they're isolating, and particularly if it slides into depression. Those kind of displacement of emotions, that reactivity, explosivity, and watch for people who internalize their grief. They internalize it and then it comes out sideways later. And sometimes for young people or even adults, it may come out in risk-taking behavior, substance use, running away from the feelings, partying. So be aware, time. And always, for young people or adults, if they get stuck in feeling responsible, stuck in their guilt, that is worrisome. I want to acknowledge the grief that, the stigma that goes along with this, both the stigma of mental health, the stigma of substance use, and the stigma around suicide. And this is a quote from Glenn Close, the actress who's done so much advocacy around mental health issues. And she says, what mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, more unashamed conversation about illnesses that affect not only individuals, but their families as well. How do we open up this dialogue and acknowledge what's there? Because likely 1 in 4 of us are affected by mental illness. 1 in 9, 1 in 10 were struggling with depression before this pandemic, even higher now. And around suicide, the guilt, the stigma is even stronger. So I love this one from NAMI National. Only now do I realize how much he must have been suffering. Because in that stigma, people are silent around their suffering so often. And we don't know until an attempt is made or until they pass. So to me, I believe that suicide is among the most stigmatized of behaviors. And I would admit that I'm going to go back up. The stigma around an overdose death is pretty similar. People hesitate to talk about it, to acknowledge it, to acknowledge the history of suicidal behavior for themselves or for a family member. Because, it's such a sign that things are not going well. It may be a sign of weakness. In my family, I told you already, I lost my best friend, Paul. And it was only after Paul's death that I learned from my mother that her father, my grandfather, and her grandfather, my great-grandfather, both of their deaths were suicides. And I was almost 12 when my grandfather died. I remember his death well. Had no idea for 40 years that it was a suicide. That's stigma right in our faces. So we may hide it in our families, and an individual who's struggling, has been through a crisis, may seek to hide that history. And yet there's so much we can learn from how they got through it successfully. And it's changing slowly. And I find the stigma around mental health, the stigma around suicide still is strongest in the more rural areas of the state. So where do you see the stigma coming up in your family and in your communities? And we're in a place in Washington County right now that we've had multiple losses. And that increases that contagion risk. It increases, the sense of despair. Because loss rarely happens in a vacuum. Many of you likely know that last Saturday, there was an auto accident in southern Washington County that took 3 young lives. And those losses, still reverberate in this county along with the ones that are up here. And it kind of adds to it. So more than one death in a community, in a program, in a school, multiple attempts or multiple suicides across a region like this, multiple losses within an individual's life, recent or over time, multiple losses within an identified group, whether they're veterans or young people, the LGBTQ community. And, we're also a suicide loss, accidental losses that are happening in this pandemic year add to the stresses. And I don't want to deny that for any of us. So how do you support somebody? How do you support yourself? We're going to get to both of those. And recognize that, how the loved one in your life grieves may be influenced by many things. What this person meant to them, what it represented, their own history of losses in their family or in their community, their personality, whether they're able to be open about their feelings, their sense of resilience, that bounce back, and whether or not they're in a supportive container in their family and home, in their community, in their school. Are those supports engaged? And women, girls, and this is gender generalities, I know that, but females often will be more open with their grieving. They'll seek to connect and to talk about it and to process it. They'll seek to feel the feelings and express them. They want to share those things. And often, males grieve privately, in isolation, they'll withdraw, and they may seek to do something. To do something to raise awareness, to raise money, or to do something in memory of the person who died. And I have said this tale before. There are two young men in northern central Maine who they lost. One of them was their brother and the other was their best friend. And those two young men decided they would dig his grave physically with their hands, with shovels, of course. And for them, that was what they could do in memory of the young man who died. And they will remember that for their whole lives, I'm sure. So think about how we do things differently as gendered. Also, what developmental, their age and stage in life can make a difference in how they're grieving. So to support them, and we're going to focus more on youth, but this is really for anybody in your life. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge the loss. Acknowledge what you know about it and invite the conversation. Don't let it be silent. They don't have to engage, but you want to make sure you're open. You're going to talk about the person. You're going to talk about their death. You're going to be talking about their life. And you're going to be as clear as you can about what's known. So there's no secrets. Create the time, the setting for the conversation. Be open to it. Be open to getting a range of questions, some of them that are hard, some of them that you're going to have to say, I have no idea the answer to that. And be comfortable asking hard questions. How are you doing with this? What does it bring up to you? How's your sleep doing? And mostly, you're going to be inviting the conversation and listening. And for our young people, some of them are going to be comfortable communicating by text, but not necessarily face-to-face early on. So don't force the conversation if you're that parent. Don't force it, but be gently persistent. Not a nag, but you're not going to deny that it's needed. And there were times when my son was that age and we said, you don't have to share that with us, but you need to get help. You need to talk about it somewhere. So if not you, because particularly for adolescents, they can get funky around their parents sometimes. If not you, then who else? Another family member? Aunt, uncle, grandparent, older sibling, a family friend, a mentor, a close friend, a pastor, a coach, a counselor at school, a counselor in the community. It's just so there's a place to air it. And in this, as a parent, as a community member, as an adult, how are you doing? A traumatic loss like a suicide, I look upon it as a stress reaction. It's a traumatic reaction in our bodies. And what that triggers After the shock and the trauma, it triggers all these stress hormones to be coursing through our system. And they trigger that fight or flight or protect reaction that is instinctual. And so what'll happen is we go through a roller coaster of emotions. And you'll notice you'll be hyper vigilant. You'll be worried about your children, worried about other people. You're going to find yourself waking in the middle of the night, that sleep disturbance. To me, it's a barometer of how I'm doing. If I'm waking up at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning and my mind is already chewing on something. So pay attention to that. Sleep disturbance, that persistent intrusive thoughts of the person who died and their life and questions around that death. And that it often will bring up, as I said, other losses. So this range of reactions are normal. They are to be expected after a traumatic death. And they should begin to diminish over time. So how much time? Certainly for most people, unless you're close in, after several weeks or a month, it's going to start to lessen and more over time, though things may reawaken it. And if it doesn't start to go away, that's one of those red flags. Think about what else you may need in terms of help. So what can you do? As a parent, as a community member, as an adult, be aware, very clear about how it's affecting you and your family. And think about how you're doing good self-care, how you're doing good self-care for you and how you're modeling that for the other people in your life. So eat well, healthy meals, and recognize there's going to be sometimes you're going to want to binge eat. And don't deny that, but be aware of it. Really try and get adequate sleep, because sleep is a time that we let go of those stress hormones. Any kind of exercise is healthy in the same way, working out that stress. Walking, yoga, dance, running, swimming, skiing, shoveling snow, as we did this morning, all those kinds of things, anything that gets the body really moving, that aerobic. Talk. Work this out with someone you trust. Particularly if you're lingering over questions, lingering over strong emotions. And give yourself time and recognize it will need time and more time. And we all know during this period of the pandemic, those distractions in our lives are important. Music, silly movies, good books, social events, adequately distanced, of course, but whatever it takes. And if it doesn't drop off after a while, consider, do you need a grief support group? Would a little bit of counseling help? If you're in a work environment, employee assistance is perfect for this kind of use. Make sure that if you're caring for somebody, that you're getting the care you need. And finally, recognize the resources both to support grief. The Maine Center for Grieving Children, they're not active this far up, but they have resources online. Local hospice organizations often have bereavement support. There's some that's been in the chat, I believe. Faith leaders, pastoral leaders. Camp Keita is a wonderful place for kids who have lost someone close to them by suicide. Look it up. And this link here is to grief support groups around the state. We're happy to share that with you. Reach into NAMI as well in the Maine Suicide Prevention Program. And with that, I want to open up a time to allow other people to talk about the resources that they have. And this is the list we have, someone from the city council, from the school department, but I'm gonna invite them to start out and begin to share that. And do you want me to open up, stop sharing my slideshow while you do that? Because there's a bunch of folks over at the library who are going to be doing. I'll do that. So, Marcia, I think you were going to start by welcoming folks. Are you in the Zoom room?
I am. Good evening. Thank you, Greg. I'm here on behalf of the Calais City Council. I'm not here to share resources, but here to just share that our Calais City Council, along with many community leaders, support this forum this evening. And we also encourage this to just be the beginning for us, that we know that this is our start, but this isn't where we need to stop. We need to continue to go. And our community leaders are on board, and we just want to thank everyone. Greg, thank you, and Nami, and all the people in 2 days. Like Marianne said, we put this together, and we had such great outpouring of support and people putting time in. So we have the resources here. Let's move forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marianne, or Marcia. Marianne, were you going to talk about Calais schools and what the school community, how we can get help?
I was, and I just want to reiterate what Marcia said as well. I'm going to pull this down. As a school leader, it's a little bit different perspective than the community leader. So we have our focus mainly on our students and their families and the supports and resources we can offer them. And so I just wanted to talk very briefly, and we can pass it on to the other panelists. But the things that we have available at the Calais Middle High School, and I'm sure our local schools have very similar items, very similar resources. But I encourage anyone here tonight to reach out to their own school to find out what is available through their specific school. At Calais Middle High School, we have the Blue Devil Health Center. We're very fortunate to have an on-site school-based health center. And through that, we have physicians that come regularly throughout the week. We also have 3 days of counseling services, and those services come from Sunrise Opportunities and AMHC. We're very fortunate to have those on site. They are continuing to work with our students throughout this time of the pandemic and remotely. So that is not a challenge that can't be overcome. Our guidance counselor, Ms. Pike, is amazing. She is a great resource for our students and our families, and she works with building relationships within the building, within our student body, within the student body and teacher body. She works on mental wellness with our students, helps them identify and address any stressors and anxiety triggers that they are having during school. And she's really, really supportive to the students in finding ways and coping skills to handle those things. She checks in regularly with our kids, and she is responsible for communicating home when things kind of come up as flags for us. We also have a freshman bar team here at Calais High School, which is our core content teachers, administration, and guidance. And we really try to focus in on our freshman students during that transition period from middle school to high school. That is, by research, proven to be some of the most difficult transitions in school. And so we try to use homeschool connections and communications to ease that transition. And it also supports social emotional well-being with our students. And when we see kids that may be at risk or maybe facing some challenges, we try to reach out to them and help offer supports for that. Administration is 100% in support of finding any resource and supporting any resource that our students need. And I just can't say that any more clearly. Our teachers are amazing here at Calais. They keep eyes out, ears out, everything, watching out for the best interest of our kids, students that may be facing challenges in school or other areas. This is where I really want to point out the importance of our ed techs, our bus drivers, our custodians, our kitchen staff, our coaches, advisors. They are all there to help with those connections and keep an eye on our kids as well. And sometimes they're the connection that keeps things rolling for our kids. And I can't overemphasize their importance in this either. And probably the most important thing that I want to say before I hand it on to the next panelist is the most important thing that I want you to take away from tonight is that sometimes we at the school have to make some really difficult calls home. Something has come to our attention, a red flag has come up, an at-risk behavior has come up, and those are really difficult conversations to have. But I want to say I cannot express my appreciation of parents and guardians that accept those phone calls, take us with what we're saying, and they instantly, and this has been every phone call that I've made, they instantly start looking out for their students. And so for me, that is a huge testament to what happens in Washington County. They recognize there's multiple people watching out for their kids, and we're there to help out. The one thing that we ask in return is that you tell us what you need. We don't know what we don't know. And so if there's something out there that you need help in bringing to you and your child, to our community, reach out, let us know. We're a phone call away, we're an email. And I encourage anyone that's having any of those challenges or struggles, reach out to us.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Thank you very much, Marianne. Simon Bowles, were you going to be next?
Can you hear me okay?
Hello?
Can you hear me okay?
Speak loudly, and I think we can. Simon, is that you?
Yeah.
Great.
Hi, my name is Simon Bowles, and I am a senior at Calais High School. I'm also with the NHS, and this year our charity is with Melanie. So throughout my life, I have struggled with an anxiety disorder and depression, so I have a bit of experience with mental health issues and stuff like that. I am also transgender and heavily involved in the LGBTQ plus community. And studies have shown that teens in grades 7 through 12 that identify with that community are more than twice as likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. So that's a very integral portion that we need to focus on. This statistic could be a result of bullying or a feeling of not being accepted by their parents or their peers. And as a member of Calais High's GSDA, which is the Gay Straight Trans Alliance, we work really hard to make our environment very safe, very loving. Whenever I go there, I feel like I can talk my feelings and vent if I need to people who have similar experiences. And I just encourage anyone who would like to use that opportunity to get hold of me or Mr. Benner, whose information is in the chat, to go ahead and use that. We're always looking for new members, and we're willing to take any questions that anybody has. Some other really good LGBTQ resources are the Down East Rainbow Alliance. It's an association that has LGBTQ support groups and events. And then it is the Maine Trans Net. It's a really good resource for any transgender people in Maine. They have support groups. They have programs that are willing to help you with anything you need. So just thank you for having me here, and feel free to ask me any questions and use those resources in the chat. So thank you.
Simon, thank you very much for sharing your voice with this community. It's an important one. Dolly Barnes from Indian Township.
Good evening. This is Dolly Barnes, and I'm the school counselor at Indian Township in Princeton. And we have a regular school counselor, that's me, that works there for all week, and we have a guidance counselor. But we also have services with our community health center. We have 2 full-time therapists and a part-time substance abuse counselor. So, you know, we do have some good resources available here on our reservation. One of the things, you know, this pandemic has been so hard on everybody, you know, our youth and the people who also deal with substance abuse. You know, recently, I don't know if Brian mentioned this, but we just had 4 sacred fires going on our reservation within 1 week. So it's been very, very tough. You know, and all of those were young men, 50 years old and younger. And when we lose a community member, we all feel that loss, you know, because most of us, if we're older, we've known that person since they were born, or they've known us since we were born. So it can be very tough. But we've in the past seen the contagion that can be brought on with suicide. You know, multiple suicides within you know, months, murder suicides. So it's, there has been tremendous loss through the years here, but we persevere and we keep going, and we are hopeful that, that with all the resources that we have, both in the school and with people like Brian, who is not afraid to talk about, suicide and to really bring that to the forefront and is able to have his voice heard so that everybody else can have their voice heard also. So, thank you.
Dolly, thank you very much for coming out. And I think what overcomes trauma is resilience, and building that resilience for all of us.
Correct.
Yeah. Tracy Charette from the Togus VA.
Good evening. Hi, my name is Tracy Charette. I'm a registered nurse. I am the Veterans Affairs State of Maine Suicide Prevention Coordinator. I've been in this role for probably about over four and a half years now. I have placed in the chat box a PDF of the resources that I'm going to just briefly highlight. We serve veterans, we support family members. So if there's anything you're needing or a resource that you're looking to connect with, I have included my contact information. Please reach out. I will do everything that I can to either help guide you, assist you, or connect you to some other resource that you might be needing, or a family member or a veteran that you know that might need to be connected. So in the chat box in the document, there's about 28 slides of different resources. I want to say from a prevention to know that the crisis line is there for veterans, service members, family members, or friends that might be concerned about a veteran. Following a death by suicide, we often refer and utilize the TAPS resource. They've been doing amazing postvention and support work. They have connections to peers, so that you'll find that information in there as well. And of course, our partner NAMI, we feel like we have a wonderful relationship, and it's certainly reciprocal in terms of reaching out where we have gaps or there's just support that we need, or looking how to connect folks. So the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, you're going to find some other links in there to different resource centers that we often refer to. I've also included in the slides readings and podcasts for some folks. So you'll find a bunch of different recommended books or podcasts to look at, how to talk to children. And if you need some other specific items, please let me know. Don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll be happy to help with any of that. The other thing I wanted to mention, again, there's some other publicly available resources. Prevention is really what we hope for sometimes. So if there's a veteran that you know and maybe has not connected or is looking for some other help, please, again, don't hesitate to reach out and connect. So I've listed a bunch of resources for that as well, for any services or a family member. We can definitely help with that parenting questions or issues or support that's needed. Another resource that you'll find in there that has been really helpful for families that are concerned and don't know how to go about talking to the veteran or service member in their life is called Coaching into Care. And this is a free service that provides some supportive counseling to family members or friends that might have concerns or need to be connected and just kind of don't know how to go about that. So again, all that is in there. And then for any providers or clinicians, I've included the Suicide Risk Managed Consultation Program. So if you are a clinician provider and are dealing with a suicide loss, there is support available specifically to clinical staff, as well as other supports for lethal means, different strategies for folks that you're concerned about or at increased risk. So if you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. If you can't, I'll put my email as well as phone number in the chat box. And if you need anything else or you want to talk offline, please give me a call and I'll be happy to talk with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy. Always good
Thank
to
you.
partner with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Same here, Greg.
Officer Bob Fitzsimmons, you in the library? You're here.
I am here.
Thank you, Bob.
I didn't prepare any notes to go with this. I'm the chief of police in Baileyville, and William McIver was the 14-year-old boy that committed suicide, and he was my friend, and he was one of my kids. What that's driven me to do was to start asking some hard questions on my Facebook post and to see if I get responses for some folks that have gone to the abyss and looked in and what led them back and what signs I could have found. And I had 135 people respond to me, either on the public site or by private message. And that meant a lot that I had their trust that they could share these things with me. And what I didn't realize I would see was that so many of the people that I grew up with were part of that 135 people that struggle, and I had no idea. So now I struggle a bit, and I just sometimes if you feel like you fail somebody, you're going to work harder so you don't fail the next one. So that's where I'm at with this. Thank you.
And that's a powerful reminder, that sometimes we don't know who's struggling. That slide from Robin Williams so speaks to that. Yeah. Nathan Lutz from the Rustic Mental Health Center. Are you on?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you barely. You might need to speak clearly.
Is this better?
Yes, a bit. Thank you.
So yes, my name is Nathaniel Lutz. I am an outpatient therapist consultant and a children's crisis clinical consultant with AMHC in Calais. I also do school contract work within the Baileyville school system and the Charlotte Elementary School. AMHC is a private nonprofit community health and social service organization servicing Washington County as well as Aroostook and Hancock counties. We have a lot of services to provide within those three counties, including mobile crisis response and stabilization, outpatient therapy, behavioral health home, rehabilitation, residential peer support, supportive visitation, and case management. In terms of crisis intervention and suicide prevention, AMHC offers outpatient therapy, where an outpatient therapist can do assessment and sessions in order to determine next steps should a client be having suicidal ideation. AMHC's Emergency Services Program delivers mobile crisis response services 24/7, 365 days per year within the three counties listed above. These can be done via telephone, face-to-face, and they are available to meet with individuals within the community at a local AMHC office, or a local hospital may call an emergency services worker to do an evaluation at the local emergency room. So the mobile worker, in consultation with a clinician from the agency, will determine the most appropriate intervention and level of care, such as a return home with referrals to outpatient services, hospitalization level of care, or a crisis unit level of care. AMHC currently operates 3 24/7 crisis stabilization units, with a 4th unit opening soon. 2 of the established crisis units are for children and adolescents, while the 3rd is for an adult crisis unit. AMHC's adult crisis unit that's currently established is located in Presque Isle and services people 18 and older. One of the children's crisis stabilization units is in Fort Fairfield, while the other is right here in Calais. And the 4th one that is opening is in Calais as well, and that is for adults. The units are supervised in highly supportive short-term residential settings for individuals experiencing an acute emotional disturbance. Those stays are typically 3 to 5 days. While on the crisis unit, clients will receive crisis stabilization therapy sessions, engage in groups and therapeutic activities, and follow a stable schedule. Clients will also have a team meeting during their stay where their team will discuss discharge planning. This discharge plan will focus on safety and referrals for outpatient services. AMHC also offers crisis stabilization, which provides crisis intervention, consultation, assessment, brief therapy, and referral through AMHC outpatient offices during regular business hours. This can be a referral on an outpatient basis or as part of a discharge plan from a crisis unit. It is important to note that AMHC has a number of substance use treatment services, which is critical for individuals at risk of suicide and due to the high substance use we currently have in Washington County. Our services include substance use peer recovery centers, our options program, and our recovery coaching, in which we partner with Healthy Acadia. AMHC has worked collaboratively on multiple programs within our community, and some of those links either are in the chat or will be in the chat. Strengthen Me is Maine's new behavioral health and resiliency response to the COVID-19 pandemic. AMHC, along with many other community organizations and aligned agencies, have formed this collaboration that offers free stress management, wellness, and resiliency resources to anyone experiencing stress reactions due to the pandemic. Again, I'll list the number here, but it'll also be in the chat. So the number for this service is 207-221-8198. AMHC has participated in Maine's Zero Suicide program, which is a quality improvement process that focuses on creating organizational systems and policies to support screening, intervention, treatment, and ongoing follow-up for all clients at risk of suicide. The foundational belief of Zero Suicide is that suicide deaths for individuals under the care of health and behavioral health systems are preventable. And then lastly, AMHC was recently awarded grant money for youth and family navigator services through the CDC, same as the Zero Suicide funding, to provide prevention, outreach, and intervention with families and youth who are at risk of suicide. It's in development, and we are working on rolling this out. And we're also hoping, we will be reaching out to local schools and youth serving organizations to support and work with in our counties for this service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel. Pastor Johnny, did you have a hand up about Nathan, or were we going to talk about services a little on?
I'd like to share with you guys the services that we offer at Common Ground Church of God. I'm a pastor here in Calais, Maine. We've taken suicide intervention training with the Coast Guard out of Eastport. And first of all, I want to say thank you to everybody that has got online tonight and is taking the time to dig into this more. I think it's important that everybody knows that suicide should never be a taboo topic to discuss. It's important that even if you have an inkling, to ask questions, and don't be scared to ask the hard questions. It's more important ever today, especially with social media, that sometimes we'll ask the questions through social media, but not face to face. So it's important that we do ask those questions. And I'll be posting in the chat some of the resources that we have available through the church. We're open to anybody of all faiths, no faiths, any denomination. We just want to be a part of the solution, and we'll pray with you, spend time with you. Contact us at any time.
Thank you, Johnny. We have a couple of people from St. Croix Health Center, Cindy and Christine White and Cindy Scott. And one of them I knew was struggling with some illness, so I'm not sure if both of them are here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, speak loudly though.
Okay. My name is Dr. Christine White, and I'm an adult and child psychiatrist at the St. Croix Regional Family Health Center in Princeton. I'm here representing the clinic, and I want to say I'm just so grateful that we're having this forum, and I agree with Marcia Rogers that this is really just the first step. I look forward to the next step and how we can bring the community together. I also very appreciate I really appreciate your presentation, and I'm hoping to take it, if it's been copied, take it back to the clinic and maybe show it to all the staff. I think the part about self-care is so important, and for all the people, when the boulder drops in the lake, or the rock, the ripples can really affect a lot of people, and a lot of people sometimes aren't even aware of that. So I'm really grateful that you talked about self-care. At St. Croix Regional Health Center, we have a team of 4 people on the behavioral health team. There's 2 primary adult and child therapists, psychiatrists, and we have a substance abuse counselor who provides assessments and treatment. There's a number of federally qualified health centers in the county. In Lubec, there's one in Lubec, there's one at Eastport Healthcare, and most of those community medical centers do have some specialized mental health treatment. Just one of 7 clinics in the area. I feel for people once they've gone through the emergency assessment, or either through the emergency room or through the crisis service, or even calling the police, a less urgent good choice is to contact your primary care provider. Most everyone does have access to a primary care provider, and those primary care providers are often the ones who that can reach and find what's the next mental health decision, if that needs to happen. A lot of mental health providers can also, a lot of medical providers can do the necessary screening to decide if something's medical going on, or whether a person might need medication, those kind of things. So I'm just here to emphasize using the primary care providers in the community to help make better decisions for your children or for yourself. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. White. And one of the things we've learned across the state is so many mental health providers are backed up, and often people can get in to see their primary care provider or their pediatrician as a way of getting things moving. And I want to invite Nancy Audette to talk about NAMI Maine's community programming and what we offer.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you to everyone who came out tonight. It's very moving to me that the Calais community in your area has this many people who are willing to give up some time to be here. I'm going to go through a lot of our resources pretty quickly, but I'll put my email address in the chat when I'm done, so that anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free to do so. One resource that NAMI has that's statewide is a helpline, and that is available to anyone. It's not a crisis line. It's a resource and referral line and information. And we get a lot of calls from parents just saying, I'm a little worried about my child, whether it's a teen or an adult. We have a wonderful person who staffs that, who will do the research, will help to find a referral, find information on all kinds of things, anything relating to mental health. So there's that. Youth mental health first aid is a training that we offer. And great. That's awesome. So I see that this stuff is being put up in the chat, so thank you. The Youth Mental Health First Aid is a training to help anyone who has interactions with young people to recognize and address any mental health issues and or addiction challenges. So there's that. We have a brand new teen text support line that was created in response to COVID and the extra challenges that young people are facing right now. That is staffed by young people who are trained and are paid to do that. And it's a text line. It's available from noon to 10 p.m. So hopefully around the time that works for young people. And again, that's going to be put up in the chat. And then so those are services we offer that are staff supported. But one of the big things that NAMI Maine does is our value is around working with people with lived experience who work as volunteers to provide support in their own communities. And that's how we are able to do support groups all over the state. Some of our educational programs like NAMI Family to Family, which is an 8-session course for family members with adult family members who are struggling with mental health challenges. and NAMI Basics, again, same kind of program, but for younger families. And the way that these are able to happen is because we have committed volunteers who've given up their time to get trained to create a community support network in their community to provide these services. Now, of course, right now, everything's happening remotely via Zoom. But when we can get back to in-person training, we'll be in, and I would love, if there are any folks here tonight who are interested in starting something in Washington County, I would love to talk with you and to see how we can get a NAMI affiliate started in Washington County. That would be just wonderful. So if anyone's interested in that and saying, how do we do that? How do we create a group right here in our community to provide support groups and other services? Let me know, because I want to talk with you for sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Nancy. I think this has been wonderful. Is there anybody else who wants to bring forward resources that you support or work with in Washington County? If not, I've got a few more slides I want to talk about in terms of the prevention side of suicide. And then I would like to bid you a very grateful good night, but not yet.
I would like to jump in and say thank you for hosting this. And I am representing the Yellow Tulip Project here and tonight, and we are a youth-driven nonprofit that believes in smashing the stigma surrounding mental health and building a community of people who realized that hope happens when youth and community leaders all work together. And our favorite tradition is planting yellow tulips in communities to provide hope and organize something like a community hope day to bring awareness and joy to this difficult subject. And we often have other physical health activities such as yoga and meditation and art and poetry and things like that on that day. So we've started a conversation in Washington County to bring our project to the community. And we've met once and we'll meet again on March 3rd. But I would love for any of you to be a part of this conversation and this activity. So if you could put your email in the chat, and I'll also put mine and our website in the chat as well. So thank you all for being here and for your time.
Yeah, Haiti, if you put yours in the chat, I know that Heather Bowles is gathering all that information so that it's all going to be coalesced. So that'll be a great thing to do.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Brian Giles, you wanted to talk about resources and what you're doing?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Greg, for presenting this forum, and thank you, John Caldwell, for putting this whole thing together. One of the things that's great about living in Washington County is that when any of us has a hardship, there's always a group of people to help. And I look around all this Zoom and I see Clem and Johnny and Ron Jenkins and Tara and Megan and Bob Fitzsimmons and Dolly and Sue and Lisa and all these people that I know that are always there whenever somebody has a fire, a Pat, whenever somebody has a is affected by cancer or whatever we do, we always get together and we have a spaghetti supper and we figure out a way to fix their tire. We figure out a way to get them to chemo. And we figure out a way to make sure that they've got the furniture for their house, right? Like that's what we do. That's what Washington County does. And somehow in this whole, I don't know why, but the people who attempt suicide have been left out of that equation. And the families who've been left behind have been left out of that equation. And sometimes I think that the men in Washington County think they're so tough that they can't just reach out to a friend and say, hey, bud, like I'm having a really hard time. Like I can't deal with today. Today is too much. Can you give me a call? Can we stand out? I mean, it's a pandemic, but can we stand outside of the pickup for a minute? And I don't care if you're on one side of the F-150 and I'm on the other side of the F-150. Can we just chat about the terrible thing that I'm feeling? Like, I think like there's so many professional resources. I can direct my students to Dolly, or if I was in Calais, I would gladly direct them to Megan. But as adults in this community, can we direct ourselves to each other? And you know, Johnny, and I appreciate what you do at your church. I appreciate the fact that you're opening the church to people to talk, but each one of us has to take that responsibility to check out with your friend who posts something weird on Facebook, or who says something weird to you in the Walmart and you're not quite sure, it's a little off with you, but just reach out. It's okay. It's okay to say something. Listen, you're going to ask about how's your diabetes. You're going to ask, hey, how's your cancer diagnosis? You're going to ask, hey, how's that thing? I know your mom passed. How you feeling, bud? You're okay with asking those things. So let's get normal with asking our buddies, hey, man, how's your mental health? Hey, dude, like, look, I know you've been feeling down. I saw your past 3 Facebook posts, man. Like, I know you're posting some really sad music lyrics. Like, what's up, man? You okay? Let's do that. Let's care for each other in a way that we already, I mean, I know we already care for each other, but let's just take one more step and just reach out to each other. And I'm not discounting ladies. Megan, I know, I see your face. I know I'm not discounting the ladies because I know you also feel the same way, but ladies are often more emotive of their feelings. And dudes, we are like, we're tough. We're going to watch UFC and football and punch a locker or something, but let's check with each other, let's check with each other and just see that we're doing okay. I love each and every one of you, and we've suffered a great loss together. So thank you, Greg, for putting this on. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Brian. You're the perfect segue to the last little bit of this, which is around prevention. And really, the Maine suicide prevention has rested on the belief and the philosophy that suicide prevention is up to each and every one of us. Not the folks with all those gobbledygook letters after their name. They're helpful too. I'm one of them. But, each and every one of us, that caring, connected concern. And I want to show you, I'm going to start out with, I'm going to show you a 3.5-minute video in the voice of youth about prevention. And this is really for all the parents out there, but when we get right down to it, we're all parents. So I want to share this, and we will see if it's going to work. Too many screens going on here. Are you seeing the video screen? Someone say yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody else.
Maybe more than anybody else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy. I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual,
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
or getting really mad, not able to sleep, or sleeping too much,
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
acting reckless, drinking, using drugs, staying out late,
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed, not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself. It happens more than you think, more than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said
I
something
wish I'd said something.
when it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
and ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask. They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes,
Well, here's what you don't say.
that's crazy.
Don't be such a drama
You're
queen.
making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing yourself over. That's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself. What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. How can I help? We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
a lot of people think about killing themselves, adults and kids. Most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead. I can't live with this.
I'm gonna kill myself, Take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure. But sometimes it goes deeper and it's not going to go away by itself. Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
But don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts. Make a list together. Write them. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe. If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. Bullets too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask. Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut, because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference. All the difference. In your kid's life.
Isn't that powerful? MayoClinic.com suicide prevention video, and you'll find it. It's one of the best things I have found in terms of doing this work, just as a short thing. So, and I want to go on from there and just share a little bit more about what we can do around to support suicide prevention. And it goes along, oh, criminy, I just lost it. It goes very much along with that piece. So let me get overwhelmed here. So let me turn that off. See if I can get back to my thing. Okay, there we go. Are people seeing my slideshow or no?
No.
Okay, so then I know what to do.
See it.
Yep, there we go. So really, that's what we need to learn to do is exactly what Brian says. We need to learn to talk about that thing which we often don't. To use the word suicide, to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you having thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore? To use direct language. And to overcome that Northern Yankee mentality of Northern New England that says we don't talk about this stuff. It's based on our history and our values. So it's time to start talking. It's time for all of us to start talking and not leaving it up to law enforcement and crisis clinicians and school counselors. They do it as well, but we need to help them. So if you're talking to someone and they are mentioning the possibility, and I love what they did in that video, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And they say yes, or maybe, or sometimes. You're going to respond by listening. Say, tell me the story. You're not going to ask, how can I help? You're going to bring your whole body and message into that. How can I help? You're going to keep them safe and you connect them with the next level of help. You are that warm handoff. And then after the crisis, the next time you see them in the street, in the school, wherever, you're going to say, hey, lovely to see you. How you doing? Because they're going to think that you think they might be weak because they struggled. You're going to overcome that. So don't shut them down with fear or anger. Don't dismiss or minimize the concerns in their life. Act cleanly. So I'm going to talk about just some quick warning signs. And there's some, like this is, if you're for Officer Bob, this is grounds for protective custody. This is a crisis. Someone who's threatening suicide. They're looking for the means, they have a plan, and usually this is a person in distress. They're anxious, they're agitated, and in this case, you get the basic facts and you make sure they get help right away and you don't leave them alone. And the other warning signs are changes in someone's behavior. Pay attention. If they're suddenly their substance use is out of control, and that hadn't been the case, that's a warning sign. If they're making those statements about, you guys would be better off if I wasn't here. I don't think I can take this much more. Those kinds of statements, that's a warning sign. That agitation, that anxiety that drives impulsivity. And anybody that speaks about being trapped and not seeing a way out, and they can be trapped in substance use, they can be trapped in an unhealthy relationship, they can be trapped in a lot of ways. And it brings that sense of hopelessness. Look for isolation. Even in virtual life, we can get isolated and withdraw. And look for both the next two, anger and recklessness. Anger keeps people at bay. Pay attention if it's a change. And recklessness, watch for that behavior that says, it doesn't matter. I don't care whether I live or die. Physical risk-taking, substance abuse risk-taking, sexual risk-taking, lots of behavior. I particularly see that in young people. And to sum this up, note that for someone who is in that suicidal crisis, they're feeling overwhelmed. The pain that they're feeling is overwhelming their ability to cope in this period of time. And they get into that all or nothing thinking. If I can't end the pain, I might need to end my life. But most of the time, there's a sense of ambivalence. If there's none, we have a hard time intervening. But that ambivalence is going to lead them to reach out to someone. And it's not necessarily going to be a doctor or a mental health clinician. It may start with their neighbor or their pastor or just anybody that they run into that they trust. And they're going to communicate what's going on. 90% of the people who attempt suicide have told at least one person before they ever act. That's our invitation to step in. Because intervening with a crisis allows people to get through it and to reconnect to hope and reconnect to help. Because most people get through it. And that's what we ask you to do. Show you care. Ask about suicide if it enters your mind, and connect them with help. So I know I went through that rapidly because I've been aware we've been here for 90 minutes, but think about it and think about what you can do. And this is the last thing I'm going to ask before I give you a true ask for you. You're going to run into people in your communities this week, next month, who have lost someone to suicide. And what you can do, no matter what your role, if you know them, you acknowledge the loss. Survivors of suicide loss say, it's like people avoid me. They'll cross the street to not talk to me. And if you talk to the person who crossed the street, they'd say, I didn't know what to say. I was afraid I might make them cry. And they may cry. Crying is a piece of it. Crying is okay. But you say, if you don't know what to say, you say, I'm so sorry. I have no idea what the right thing to say is. I'm so sorry for your loss. And if you knew the person that died, if you knew William, you use William's name. If you knew Daniel, you use Daniel's name. And you tell a story about him. You talk about their life, because that keeps them alive in the heart of that grieving person. You can't fix grief, but you can share your presence and allow them to tell their story. And to keep the person alive as they let them go. Acknowledge the good things in their life. And then stay in touch. And we live in Maine. So if you say, you let me know, is there anything I can do to help? You let me know. Will they call you? Probably not. But if you say, hey, I do a big cookout on Thursdays, and I'm going to bring you some food every Thursday until you beg me to stop. I'm going to pick up our kids, yours and mine, on Tuesday afternoons because I get out of work early. And you do that, and you stay in touch. And if they're really struggling, if they go down to that depression around grief, suggest they get help and be the link to that help. And use us as a resource. Use us as a resource at any time for help around suicide, around risk. Reach out if it's a veteran to the VA system. Reach out to your health center, your school. Reach out. So I'm going to stop my share and I'm going to invite more questions and more comments from anybody. And please, I am loving everything that's been in the chat room in terms of the materials and the resources and the caring. And Heather, thank you, is compiling that into a Google Doc and it'll get out there. So I get to sit back now. Final thoughts, questions? I'm happy to answer anything I can. This is a hard time. And breathe, and breathe, and breathe. And what I ask from you at the very end of this is to think about how you can use yourself and the richnesses in your life, that which you have extra of, love, time, caring, concern, worry, and use it for good. Use it to reach out to someone you're worried about. And if you're worried about them and they're isolating, like my friend Paul did, you reach harder and you go knock on their door. I didn't keep him alive forever, but in his note at the end of his life, he said that my wife and I probably extended his life 3 or 4 years by our concern. And that's what we can do to get people through those dark days.
Can you unmute? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I might cry a little.
Okay.
But I had a brother who committed suicide about 16 years ago, and I'm still very angry.
Yeah.
And as people are talking and people are sharing, I'm finding myself crying. Anybody that knows me, I'm pretty emotional anyway. As far as I cry too easily and that gets in the way and makes me angry. But I guess my question is, how do I stop being so angry?
Have you accepted, have you been able to accept what was going on in your brother's life that drove that?
No, probably not. I'm just pissed at him because his daughter was 13 and she now has been married, graduated from high school, college, has 2 beautiful baby girls, and he's tainted that in any kind of way, and it makes me really angry because she's turned out so amazing. No thanks to him. And I guess that's the biggest motivation of my anger.
And I think you've already suggested that underneath that anger is the sadness and the pain. And that's to get through. And it, to use a clinical term, it sucks.
Yeah, it's a big bucket of suck.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
And I'm sorry for you. But watch his daughter, watch those nieces and nephews grow, love them, give them the time that their dad did not give them.
And do you think that would help with my anger?
It can't hurt, and it's putting that anger towards something loving and good.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense and that feels good. Okay, thank you.
And reach out to the people here who know you, who accept that you cry, because cries are tears. Tears are strength.
Shouldn't feel like that.
Yeah, I know, I hate crying too, but I know it's a strength.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Suicide gives pain for a long time. So let's work to keep people alive where we can.
I just had a couple of questions and I'm not sure if now's the time to ask them.
Please do, Chris.
So I've been teaching, this is my 24th year teaching, and I know that there are a lot of times that kids don't, there aren't signs that we can look back and say that we saw those signs. But for those kids that over the years that have reached out and they've cried for help and you've tried to get them that help, I guess there's been two things that haunt me sometimes. And there were a couple of occasions that when I sat down with a kid and called crisis, that in order for crisis to talk to that student on the phone, they had to have parent permission. And I'm not sure if that's still the way. And I'm hoping you can tell me that that's not the way. But for a lot of kids, if they're suicidal because of abuse from a parent, or, they don't want the parent to know, they're not going to call crisis. They're not going to tell you the next time they're in crisis and have you sit down and call crisis with them. And then the second issue that I've had over the years is, those kids that you finally get to come out and, they admit that they're suicidal and they all go to the emergency room. And there have been incidences that a kid has had to wait in that emergency room for 2 to 3 weeks before they can get a bed in the facility. So that kid won't stay there that long. And when they get out of that facility, they won't call me in the middle of the night, because they know that, I'm a mandatory reporter and they don't want to go through that. So, I'm hoping that has changed since the last call that I got, about the 2 to 3 week wait in an emergency room. But if we're gonna, for a lot of times it just gets me, because a lot of people will scream and say, I wish that kid reached out for help. A lot of these kids are screaming for help. And it's such a helpless feeling when you feel like, you've led them to where they need to go. You've led them to the emergency room, and it's not the emergency room's fault. It's just there's no beds in facilities, and maybe that's changed. But those are the two things that have really haunted me that I think we can change.
Well, Christina, I know that at times there is still waits in the emergency room, and that's tragic. And I'm looking for that to change. And I'm going to ask, I know Jillian is a crisis clinician on. Jillian, can you talk about under what circumstances crisis might be able to talk to a kid? Maybe not. I know I used to be a crisis clinician, and often we were able to have that conversation, but in order to come to any kind of disposition to try and get someone help, almost invariably it had to get support for a guardian. And if there was abuse, there have been times when I have worked with emergency services to get that in place. It's hard, it's not easy. And I think you being that good ear and to advocate for that care where you see the need is really important, because you as an adult can amplify the voice of that kid.
But what if it's in the evening or in the middle of the night and somebody doesn't have someone to sit there with them and they can't get a hold of that parent if they don't have a cell phone? Or how many kids are we losing because of that one rule? It just seems like there can be something done that a kid can talk to somebody if they need it. Yeah. And I don't know how to fight it. I don't know if it's going to the state level or what, but I do know, I was told at the time that a parent can call prior to a situation, and just give a blanket permission. If my child ever calls crisis, you have permission, my permission to talk to them.
So,
hey, Greg, what about the teen text line?
That's not a crisis line. I'm gonna ask Christina Greenlaw. Someone from the crisis team? Can you connect with Christina and give her the information she needs around this system? So I'm not gonna. The teen text line is not a crisis line. The NAMI's teen text line.
Sure, we can do that. So Plum Devoy MHC, we'll go ahead and follow up and
Thank you, Greg. I'm sorry.
Appreciate it.
So can a parent give blanket permission?
I think it's a multi-level question. Again, Plum Devoy with MHC, but certainly if a child is in crisis, Greg hit it right on the money. If a child is in crisis and there is a representation of suicidal thought there, then absolutely we work with the individuals. It's the coordination of care that becomes the more challenging piece. So if you've got an immediate crisis, we need to respond in crisis. don't know the particulars about that particular situation, the level of suicidality gets a little more complicated. But if there's a child or anybody in crisis who needs a response, our role is to help respond, and we do assessment work, we bring in the families, and those are the kinds of things that get. So it depends on the situation that occurred, but absolutely. Waiting emergency room stays, I wish we had better news. I don't think it's any different. As a matter of fact, it's become more and more challenging over time, unfortunately. Yeah.
I think kids stop reaching out, when they go and are told that, they come home and then that's what I've found over, that's the helpless feeling that I've had over the years.
Yeah. And I urge you as a responsible, caring, connected adult to work to amplify the voices of those specific kids you're worried about in that time frame of crisis. That's one thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us can do that for the kids in our lives. Other thoughts or questions? You guys are an amazing group of 88 people. And you're a representative of a broader community that you can spread this energy to. So I'm going to just give people permission to take this energy forward into your lives and into your communities. And let's see what else we can do. And if you need to hang up and call it a night, please take care of yourselves. Hug your children and your family and your friends, and be kind, because we need kindness in this world, because that's one step. And thank you very much again to everybody who pulled this together. People, other questions or comments? I'm happy to be here until the last little square goes blank.
Thank you everyone for signing in, and I'm so happy to see so many helpers in my community that are represented here tonight. There's so many, and I know I didn't touch on everybody, but all the teachers, Kayla and Lisa, and there's so many, like Janice, Margaret. If you're not reaching out just to the professional help, reach out to the people in your life that that are there for the students and for the adults. Just reach out to each other. Like just we're here, we're here at 2 a.m. and we're here at 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. Just reach out. We love you.
Take care, Brian. I think this is one of the best chats I've seen in anything I've done. It's wonderful.
So this is Mary Ann at Calais High School, and I just want to say that, as Marsha had alluded to at the beginning, that we are looking at this being the first step. One of the, or a couple of next steps is that I would like people to keep an eye out, because we would like to offer the suicide prevention training in the coming weeks. And we also have a person that is available to teach the NAMI basics as well. And so that is a little bit longer commitment. It is a 6-week, I believe, training. So please keep an eye out for those offerings.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And thank you, Heather, for organizing all the materials that are coming in. I appreciate that greatly. And take care of that son of yours. Phenomenal resource. I'm so glad that he came out tonight. Other questions? Other questions? If it's a veteran related, Tracy's still on. Anything for her? And I want to acknowledge all the school staff that chose to come out. Christina, do you have another question, or did you just have your hand up still.
I don't know how to take it off.
I just did it for you. It's on.
Okay, thank you. I was just reading the comment.
I have power. Hmm. Somehow it's amazing to believe that it's only Wednesday. I see Heather nodding. Other thoughts or questions? Anything at all? Ooh, Kim, suppose there could be a Facebook chat room for a place to go? That'd be something to work on with people in your community.
But kids don't use Facebook. Let me guess. He said for old people, didn't he? Facebook. Yeah. He reminds me of that all.
It's the other power I have, mute. Last questions from anybody? Thoughts? Things that you would like to see in your community? And I don't think I shouted out to John Cowell and all the work that he does in this community. Phenomenal. Thank you, John.
Can I say something?
Absolutely, Michaela.
My stepfather does Mandarin, and I would like to think putting this on with you guys. Yeah, I want to thank you guys for putting it on. The support system and the resources and reaching out for everyone.
And thank you for coming out and supporting it and sharing your energy. So Megan, how many school clinicians were on tonight, do you think?
Well, we had Nathan, who's contracted through Woodland. I'm the social worker at the elementary school. Janice Rice, the guidance counselor.
Yeah.
Jessica Carabello, I think is how you pronounce it. She does a lot of work in Indian Township
Great.
with students up there, and then Dolly, of course.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that I saw.
Christine, is she a?
I believe she's a teacher.
Yeah, I'm a special ed teacher.
Okay.
Uh-oh, okay.
And where are you again, Christina? What school
I'm
are
at
you
Shedd.
in? Okay, that's right.
I was your student teacher in 5th grade.
Yes, you were. I remember.
Many
Long
moons ago.
Long time ago.
Oh, the history.
So I feel really bad. I got some private chats from somebody on here. There's no way to connect with them after.
Is it? I don't know who you were chatting.
It was with a student. So I feel like that I should reach out, but I didn't see it until after when I went to look for the name, it was gone. So. But they wouldn't get it afterwards anyway with the Zoom, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, maybe next time you'll reach out.
Thank you for caring.
Thank you.
Other last thoughts? I'm going to turn off the recording.